Welcome to Conversation Starters with Jewish Museum Milwaukee. My name is Ellie Gettinger and I'm the Education Director at Jewish Museum Milwaukee. And each week we pick a theme to explore current events, issues in our community, topics that we just want to know more about. And we use this as a way of kind of looking at our personal tagline, our museum tagline, where conversations happen. And today we're going to have one of these conversations with someone who is very near and dear to the museum, Anneliese Dickman. She is the city program manager of the Brady United Against Gun Violence. So we're going to talk about that. But before we jump into our bigger topic today, Anneliese, can you tell us about how you got involved with the museum and what your role is?
Sure. Hi, Ellie. It's good to see you. I became involved with the museum, I think 6 or 7 years ago now, joining the board. And I really joined because I've always loved museums. I got married in a museum. I consider myself a lifelong learner and a museum person. So it felt like a great fit, and it was so fun to see how everything comes together behind the scenes and turns into these great exhibits. And now, right now, I'm serving as president of the board of the museum.
And so in terms of kind of your bigger, you have had this really amazing trajectory in Milwaukee of looking at issues and looking at how people are related in community. And you're now engaged in gun violence prevention through Brady United Against Gun Violence. Do you feel like there's an intersection between all of these kind of diverse interests?
Totally. Yeah, totally. So when I moved to Milwaukee 22 years ago, I got started working in public policy at a local government level. And that was a great way to get to know the city and the county and the region and really understand how things happen, like how things came to be. How do we have such an amazing park system? How do we have a transit system? What do our taxes go towards? How are schools funded? And so that gave me a footing to really understand how well those policies really did what they were supposed to do. And for a long time, I focused on education policy and analyzing how well we got what we paid for in terms of our education system. And then when Sandy Hook happened, I felt like, gosh, this could have been Bayside, Wisconsin. I mean, I've been to Newtown, Connecticut, and in terms of the demographics, in terms of the geography, in terms of the housing stock, it's so similar to Bayside. And in addition, my daughter was in first grade at the time, the same age of those kids, and her name is Abiel, and one of the children who was murdered was named Abiel. And I felt like, you know, I have the skills to do something here. I understand public policy. I understand how it works. I understand the needs of the community. I should really use those skills to try to solve this problem. It seems like it can be solved. And that was, you know, in 2013 that I made a big career switch to work on this. And so 7 years later, still working on it. It still needs to be solved. But everybody, the change from then to now in terms of, you know, how people feel about this issue, how they feel open to talk about it now, whereas before that felt really scary to talk with people about how you feel about guns and gun policy. It's been a big change. And so it's been an interesting journey to see how this has come around. And now this week, how people who normally separated gun violence from police violence have seen, you know, for a big bunch of the country, they are the same thing. They feel that police violence and gun violence are the same thing. So the conversation is still evolving, and my understanding of the issue is still evolving.
Within that kind of realm of public policy and gun violence, prevention, what are the kinds of you know, tools that you guys are using in this moment, and how has that shifted in the past, 11 weeks?
Yeah, right. Since coronavirus, my job has actually changed quite a bit. So at Brady, our mission is to unite people against gun violence. And we do that by working in the court system. We file a lot of lawsuits and legal actions in the court system. through Congress and state legislatures where we try to improve policy and law, and through communities. So that's what I do here in Milwaukee. I try to work with community groups on the ground in Milwaukee who are doing that day-to-day gun violence prevention and strengthening our neighborhoods, strengthening our communities. And since coronavirus, my job has changed quite a bit because we've seen, not only because, I'm not really out in the community as much as I was, but also because we've seen in the early days of all the stay-at-home orders, a huge surge in gun sales. And that was really concerning to us for several reasons. One is all reports from the gun dealers were that most of these gun buyers were new gun owners and they hadn't necessarily owned a gun before. And so that responsibility of owning a gun and bringing a gun into your home is something we work on at Brady day in and day out. Because so many incidents of gun violence actually occur in the home. So whether it's domestic violence or suicide or an unintentional shooting, those can be prevented if you store your guns securely at home. And so we do a lot of work around that with gun owners, with non-gun owners, to educate people about those risks of gun ownership and educate them about the ways you can store your guns securely. And under that umbrella, which we call End Family Fire, because nobody wants to see a gun used in the home in that way. So we've been able to bring people together. So we've been focused on further pushing that message out, knowing there's all these new gun owners. The other big concern for us was how the way the gun sales system in America works right now. The background check system can get overloaded. And when that happens, some gun sales are allowed to go through, even though that person has not yet had a background check. And with this huge surge in gun sales, we knew that was a big risk that the system would get overloaded and that some of these sales would go through. And if you remember the Charleston shooting at the AME church in Charleston a few years ago, that was a case where he was able to purchase a gun despite his background check not having gone through yet. So we've been advocating at the federal level to change that, to fix the system so that couldn't happen. So we really push forward in our advocacy around that. And then finally, for people like me and my colleagues who work in other cities across the country, we saw these neighborhood groups that do the day-to-day gun violence prevention really be seriously affected by coronavirus. I mean, it's hard for them to get out and do this work, but also while they were still engaged in gun violence prevention, because the gun violence epidemic is still going on despite a pandemic happening, they really had to adapt and start doing education around preventing the coronavirus. So they were doing violence prevention and virus prevention at the same time, because they were the only ones out there still in the communities. So we tried to figure out how we could help support that work that they are doing, both here in Milwaukee and across the country. So we were advocating at the federal level for federal resources, a bump during this coronavirus period, but really sustainable federal resources for these small groups. And then in the DC area, where most of my colleagues are, they really helped some of these really small nonprofits who are, not able to afford to hire an attorney or figure out all this bureaucracy to access some of that resources that were made available during coronavirus. So we helped them file for those payroll protection loans from the federal government and just tried to do what we could to ensure that their work could continue, because it is important work.
Did you find that with the kind of looking to the federal government and trying to kind of reinforce the ground, the work that's going on the ground, did you find that there was pushback in kind of super divided partisan Washington, or was there a sense that being able to engage resources, and making sure that we're giving these nonprofits who actually have the connections in these communities the resources was a bipartisan issue?
Right. Well, unfortunately, anything doing with gun policy becomes very politically polarized among elected officials. Among the general public, it's really not. Most people, whether you're Democrat or Republican, agree with most common sense improvements to gun policy and agree that the people who are out there working on conflict resolution, working on preventing retaliatory shootings, that obviously they're doing good work and should be supported. And Brady always tries to work in a bipartisan manner to the extent that we can. We were founded by Jim and Sarah Brady. Jim Brady was the press secretary for Ronald Reagan and was injured in that attempt on Ronald Reagan's life. So we were started by Republicans, and we've continued to try to work in a bipartisan manner. At the state level, it's different. Usually at the state level, you can cobble together a better coalition, but at the federal level, it's still very polarized.
And when you talk about those kind of common sense laws, like this is, I think, the core of what you're advocating for, what does common sense gun legislation look like?
So we have a big agenda that we work on all the time. Number one is making sure every gun sale has a background check, because we know from research based on how it works in other countries and how it works in states that have stronger laws versus states that have weaker laws, that background check really goes a long way to preventing not only homicides, but gun suicides as well. So that's always been our number one priority, but we have several priorities. And during this time of the coronavirus surge, what we've really been trying to focus on is ensuring that the pandemic doesn't provide an excuse to actually move backwards on some of the things that we have in place already. So we've been pushing back against several decisions that were made by the Trump administration in the midst of the coronavirus response that we felt were really dangerous. So for example, they allowed states to choose whether they felt keeping gun stores open as an essential business was an appropriate response or not, and each state kind of made their own decision there. Clearly, we felt that there was a way you could respond to the coronavirus without ensuring that gun stores were treated the same as grocery stores. I mean, that's a big difference. And the governing body that regulates gun stores, which is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, also tried to make some changes that allowed gun stores to loosen up a little bit the practices around gun sales. So, that would have allowed people to do curbside gun purchases. And that is very dangerous. We really rely on gun dealers to interact with gun purchasers and use their judgment. And if this is not a sale that seems like it's going to be safe, if this person might be contemplating suicide, for example, or might be talking about how they're going to get revenge on someone else. There are signals during the course of a gun sale that might require a gun dealer to use their judgment. How does that happen when you're doing these sales, through a car window, at the curb? We really worked hard to push back against those types of decisions that were being made in the midst of the pandemic that we thought were very dangerous.
Do gun dealers have training on what they're looking for, or is this kind of a honor system? I'm just amazed that this is the first I'm hearing about that kind of protection, and so I'm interested in what is it? Is it just a hope and pray that the right person sees the right thing, or is there something more formal?
So that is a really good question. And in normal times, that's what I spend a lot of my time working on, because gun dealers are really seen by the ATF as part of the entire system and part of the way we prevent people from accessing firearms who would only misuse them and use them to harm others or themselves. So yes, they're supposed to understand their role in that system and use their judgment to interrupt a sale that probably shouldn't go through. And most of them do that. I mean, for the most part, gun dealers understand that and absolutely do that. But there's what we know to be a very small percentage of dealers who really turn a blind eye when there's someone in front of them who is making it obvious that the sale should not go through. So sometimes that's someone who, for example, this happened in Wisconsin in the past year, a gun dealer in Paddock Lake, Wisconsin, sold the same handgun, same model, make and model handgun, to the same woman every week for 4 weeks in a row. Now, at some point you think, this woman is probably not purchasing all these handguns for herself. Is she a gun trafficker? Is she supplying someone else with these guns? That's troubling, and that's where, you know, we do rely on gun dealers to step in and say no and contact law enforcement. In this instance, the woman, the 5th week, went to another gun dealer and tried to make a purchase there, and that dealer did call law enforcement because they thought her buying pattern was suspicious, and she was buying guns on behalf of other people. So it was pretty dangerous to be doing that. If you're supplying people who don't want to go through the background checks themselves, that's not only illegal, but it's quite dangerous. There's a reason they don't want to have the background check. So we do try to educate dealers about that role, try to educate them about business practices that they can implement that can help ensure that all those sales are keeping guns in the hands of people who are going to use them responsibly.
Thereby protecting their business in the long run.
Right, exactly, exactly.
In terms of, we framed this week because this weekend is kind of an important moment for gun violence prevention. Can you tell us a little bit about what is happening this weekend?
Yeah, that's important to note. So the whole month of June is Gun Violence Prevention Month, but the first weekend in June every year includes Gun Violence Prevention Awareness Day, which this year is June 5th. And we call it Wear Orange Day. And in a normal year, everybody would be asked to put on orange and go out and demonstrate that you want to see gun violence prevention be part of our laws and our policies in this country. So this year is going to be different because not everybody can go out and do their normal things that they would do. There will be a press conference hosted by the City of Milwaukee and the Office of Violence Prevention on Friday. That'll be on Facebook to talk about some of the issues. Mostly we've seen a very concerning uptick in domestic violence homicides in Milwaukee so far this year, especially during COVID when people were forced to stay home. That was very dangerous for a lot of families where abuse was present. And then, of course, every summer, the City of Milwaukee experiences an uptick in shootings and homicides. And this summer, you know, we're very concerned about that, and we'd like to see the trend change. We've been doing really well the past couple of years in keeping those homicides and shootings going down, and we'd like to continue that for this year. So, Wear Orange Day is Friday. A big coalition of people who work on this issue will be part of that press conference. And we ask people to wear orange, even if you're just gonna be home, snap a selfie, post it on Facebook, kind of spread the word in that way that you're part of this movement.
What's the hashtag?
Hashtag is Wear Orange.
Got it.
Yep. And Brady will have available on our Facebook page a thing you can print out and put in your window. So that'll be something that kids can help with and try to get the message out that way too.
Are there things from an advocacy standpoint that you are looking for citizens to do right now, specific campaigns, specific initiatives that you need some kind of community support around?
Yeah, absolutely. We always need community support. That's how we work. So we help amplify the voices of people, neighbors, and people in the community who are concerned about this issue. So I'll send you a link that you can put in the comments of this conversation that will take you to a page on our website that talks about gun sales during this pandemic of coronavirus and specific actions you can take around that. So there's a link that will take you to a place where you can email your state legislatures and your governor. There's a link to email the Department of Homeland Security. There's a link to sign a petition to the ATF. So we make it very easy for you to take action. We make it very easy for you to use your voice and get the message out there. And of course, you can always join Brady and support our work, or any of the other local gun violence prevention groups in Wisconsin. We work closely with several other groups. There's a statewide grassroots group called WAVE, the Wisconsin Anti-Violence Education Fund, and they're also a great group to get involved in if you're concerned about this issue.
Well, I appreciate all of this insight. I think that it is one of those things that when we get into this world of COVID-19 and quarantine, that there's so many other things going on, and especially in this last week, that there's so many things, but this is on that kind of core and of justice and looking at, you know, what are our responses to violence? What are the ways in which there's unseen violence in our communities, and how are we responding to those people who probably don't have ways of advocating for themselves? So I've so enjoyed getting the sense of this. Is there anything that you'd like to kind of add as a final comment, or anything else that you would want our public to know?
Yeah, I would like to add, I think you make a really good point. So one of the reasons I feel it's important for everybody to join this movement around gun violence prevention, and oftentimes suburbanites or white people join after they hear about a mass shooting or a school shooting, which is a perfectly good reason to join. But the people who are most impacted by gun violence in this country are people who live in urban cities, people of color, and they live this violence almost on a day-to-day basis, and they raise their children with a different sense of security than how we raise our children. And traditionally, we've also asked those communities, the most impacted communities, to also be the ones who solve the problem. So they're carrying the burden of suffering the problem, but we've also placed the burden of solving the problem on them. And what we're trying to do at Brady is help shift that burden, to not expect the people who are living this trauma to also figure out how to prevent it, but to take it upon ourselves and our allies and the elected officials we work with to figure out solutions for this problem, and to not make it something that, you know, communities who are already ravaged by a lot of other issues have to figure out all on their own. And I think we're seeing that this week, a problem with police violence that has been borne mostly by people of color has also been considered their problem to solve. And that clearly is not going to be a solution for this. We have to have a broader coalition of people find a solution. So there are a lot of overlaps between those two issues, and I feel very proud to work for an organization that sees our role as being one of helping to bring about more racial equity and racial justice.
Well, Anneliese, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your work with the museum. Thank you so much for your work with Brady and gun violence prevention. This has been a conversation starter. There is a lot to think about here, so please take these talking points home. Check out the Brady website. We'll put the link in our comments. And if you like what we do here at Jewish Museum Milwaukee, feel free to, drop by jewishmuseummilwaukee.org, and you can make a donation there anytime. Thanks so much, and have a great day.